Welcome today to Advisicon's online academy. I'm excited to present to you on how to create goals and KPIs in Power BI. My name is Ken Lowen, and I'm the Director of BI and Analytics. Key performance indicators, or KPIs, are a tool for measuring progress toward a goal. In short, they quickly communicate whether the organization, team, project, or individual is doing well or poorly relative to that goal. Although KPIs have long been available in Microsoft Power BI, in Excel, in analysis services, and in many other business intelligence and analytics platforms, many analysts struggle with creating and presenting KPIs. This webinar will help you clarify your understanding of what a KPI is, help you recognize the challenges so that you can overcome them, and help you learn some techniques for transforming your data, as well as some do's and don'ts for presenting KPIs in Power BI. On our agenda today, we're going to talk about what the value is of delivering goals and KPIs in Power BI. We're going to level set by agreeing on a few definitions, and we're going to go through some of the typical challenges that are experienced by people trying to report goals and KPIs. I'm going to make some very strong suggestions as to what we should do, and then we're going to go look at this in Power BI. Why do we want to create goals and KPIs in Power BI? Well, let's walk ourselves through these steps. First of all, our basic definition. KPIs are a tool that we use to measure and communicate progress toward a goal. As project managers, we're often talking about progress toward a goal, completing a project, delivering the end product to the customer of our project. And we're talking about our progress or our status in relation to a stake in the ground, a baseline, if you will. And our goal is to be as close as possible to our plan, which is what that baseline represents. The purpose of communicating this is because stakeholders need to measure and communicate progress so that they're able to perform fact-based decision-making. The reality, however, is that our measuring and communication processes are often difficult, time-consuming, or they're inconsistent, with the result that our KPIs are often not helpful in decision-making because they're not well understood, they may not be timely, they're inaccurate, and they might not be aligned to the required decisions. So, let's lay a foundation with some definitions. There are a lot of definitions out there, but they've got some common themes. KPIs represent quantifiable metrics or measurements. They're used to gauge performance, as we've already said. They're time-based, so they're relevant to an as-of date, which might be now, it might be last Thursday, it might be when we had our meeting previously. They always relate to goals or objectives. And that's one of the key stumbling blocks that I encounter in working with clients and other analysts is that they forget that a KPI has to be related to some sort of a goal or objective. KPIs can be applicable to any size group from one to many. So why are there challenges? Some of the challenges that are encountered are that the KPIs are not understood or trusted. And so if you've got an overly complex system or an overly large system of KPIs or metrics, or the method that you use to capture the data that is used for the computation is not trusted or is not known and so can't be trusted, that's certainly going to be a strong barrier, and that's very commonly encountered. Another key barrier to success with goals and KPIs is that there are many to choose from. And so the target-rich environment causes confusion, causes distraction, and often causes us to generate an awful lot of effort for very little benefit. We may find that the KPIs look good, but the business is not being successful, or vice versa. The business is being good, but the KPIs don't look successful. And it may be a very, very labor-intensive process to create our KPIs or gather the data with the result that the output is not timely. What do? First of all, simplify. And there's a couple of different threads to that. Simplify the definition of the KPIs. If they're overly complex, then it's very difficult for somebody to apply an understanding of the KPI to a decision they're making about their job, which then impacts their success at helping your organization succeed. If they're not trusted, simplify the process that you're using to gather the data so that there's more transparency available there and your team are able to better apply a weighting to the value that you're presenting in the KPI and apply that to their own decision making about their jobs. Focus on that first word, key, in the term key performance indicators. I once worked with a large consumer packaged goods organization that had hundreds of what they called KPIs, or key performance indicators. Well, if you have hundreds, by definition, they're not key. And so zero in, narrow your scope down to the indicators that actually will drive fact-based decision-making that will be understandable by your target audience and enable them to separate the wheat from the chaff and really focus in on what's relevant to their decision-making today. If the KPIs look good, but they're not actually reflecting the strength of the business, then change what you're measuring. Your KPIs need to be aligned to the strategies you have for success, so that if a KPI says that you're performing strongly, there is a general understanding and agreement that you're performing strongly. And then if the process for gathering your data and distilling it and reporting on your KPIs is labor intensive and untimely or unwieldy, consider investing in improving this process. Put some automation into it, train your people more, because the goal of goals and KPIs in Power BI is that you're going to analyze the activity of your business. You're going to be presenting information to your team members so that they can assess the value of the work that they're doing for the shared success of the organization, that they're going to make decisions. Your stakeholders are going to make decisions as leaders. And so if the value is actually there, if the KPIs have the ability to drive decision making, and the decisions being made have the ability to drive the success of the organization, then you've got a value proposition there that should stand up. And so investing in the strength of that initial step there, creating the KPIs, has value for the organization, is going to drive that by improving the decision making. We hear the value of this many times, and so we really need to focus on carrying that banner forward. We've heard from a number of audiences or a number of speakers, measure what matters. And so focus there on measuring the things that are going to actually impact your business when people get that information and make decisions based on it. John Wooden, the famous basketball player and coach of the UCLA Bruins, says, "Don't measure yourself by what you have accomplished, but by what you should have accomplished with your ability." And so we recognize there that we've got a common theme, and we'll look at that definition again in a different context going forward. W. Edwards Deming, famous for driving a statistical process analysis, says management by results is like driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror. And so we want to focus far less on the what happened in the past and more on the where are we now and what is the next decision that needs to be made, or what is the future effect of where we are now and what has happened. So let's move on to Power BI now. This is Power BI Desktop. And Power BI Desktop is the tool that is used by an analyst to create a data model by receiving in or loading in source data that's received from the results of business operations. The analyst then mashes up this data, combines it, transforms it in order to make it useful for presentation in a desktop, and then creates a series of reports and optionally dashboards in Power BI that are going to communicate the analysis of information to our target audience. We've got a number of metrics on here, some of which qualify as KPIs, some of them don't. So a real common one right here, count of projects. That's not a KPI. It's a metric. It doesn't have a goal, or at least not an evident goal. Likewise, project cost, project work quantified in hours. Active risks and active issues also don't have obvious goals, so they're metrics. Let's take a look up here at our count of projects by cost status. When I hover over this, we see that the value represented by these 19 items in here, 19 projects, is that they are at less than 10% over baseline cost. That's a KPI. That's telling us relative to our goal, baseline cost, we are less than 10% over that value. And we can similarly look at others in this same bar graph. We see these 3 projects are between 10 and 20% over baseline cost, and these 5 are at least 20% over baseline cost. And then I have a number over here of 32 representing the projects that don't yet have a baseline. And we have similar analyses here for our schedule and work status. In this same report, we have a list of the projects down here at the bottom, showing all of them and showing their individual KPIs by project in terms of colored indicators in a red, amber, green methodology that shows us those that are closest to the baseline and those that are significantly over the baseline. So these are very typical presentations of goals and KPIs in the project management environment. We set a baseline, which is our intended plan for our project, and then as we update status and progress on tasks, we get an indication as to whether we are still in line with our baseline or not. Let's take a look at a single project status report. By the way, these 2 reports are outputs of our Introduction to Power BI course here at Advisicon. Our Introduction to Power BI course focuses on analyzing the data that is generated by Project Online as a typical project management system, and then techniques that are used for analysts about projects in a project management organization environment to create useful reports, metrics, and KPIs that can be used by project and portfolio managers for assessing the efforts of those projects. In the single project that we have selected in our report, we again have our KPIs, the values for this individual project presented at the top of the screen with both colored indicators and text values so that it's very clear and unambiguous to our target audience what these indicators are telling them. We've got a lot of information about detailed tasks. We then have information about the amount of work that has been performed and is yet to be performed in this project. We've got counts of issues and risks in the same project. And so we can just change this slicer up at the top of the screen to go to another project and assess its condition based on our data. We've got another report here. Sticking with our theme of being in a project management environment, this is project earned value. Project earned value is a prototypical KPI. Its foundation is goals. So the goals of our earned value metrics are little to no variance in the schedule and little to no variance in cost. So the concept of earned value is often thought to be very, very complex, and certainly presentation of it can be complex. But the intent of earned value is an analysis of whether we are delivering the expected results on the expected schedule for the expected cost. And where those things vary, we experience variance. We measure those in terms of planned value. Planned value is our goal. This is the cost value of the work that we expect to perform during a particular week in this chart. And then we find that over time, we have little or some variance to our schedule. Our heading up at the top here is intended to help drive some ambiguity out of this. Many times people will look at one of these dashboards and they won't really understand, well, is a negative number good or bad? And they'll think, well, maybe it's good in one case, I'm early, or maybe it's bad in another case, I'm over budget. And in case, what we've done here is we have labeled our heading that shows us that favorable schedule variance is represented by a positive number and unfavorable schedule variance is represented by a negative number. And the same thing with cost variance. And so during this particular period, we see that our planned value, cumulative for the project, was expected to be $64,572. We actually show an earned value through that same period of $63,220. So our earned value was below what we planned. We have a schedule variance. We also see that our actual cost was to do that. So we earned value of 63,000, but the actual cost of that was 64,572. So in fact, we had a cost variance of 1352. So we did the amount of work that was expected, but we drove less progress, and it still cost what we expected to spend. That's a pretty important metric for a project manager to be able to understand is it looks like I'm exactly on my budget because my actual cost was equal to my planned value. But in fact, I spent the amount that was expected, but I drove less benefit for the organization. Therefore, I had a negative impact. Related metrics to these are our cost performance index and our schedule performance index. And related to those are our cost variance percentage and our schedule variance percentage. Any or all of these might be useful in analysis. And so this fairly numbers heavy chart presents a lot of information that might be used in different circumstances, but because it's all there, you can choose what you're going to use. In order to aid the user with interpreting this information, we have inserted a key here showing them how to understand these standard earned value concepts. So from a cost perspective, if cost value is greater than 0, CPI will be greater than 1. And if that's the case, then we are under budget. If cost variance is 0 and the cost performance index is 1, then we're directly on budget. And if our cost variance is less than 0, as we saw right up here, and we saw here in our heading, we are over budget. We have an unfavorable, and actually we mean to look at that here, an unfavorable cost variance. But the same interpretation happens with regard to our schedule variance and schedule performance indicator. So if our schedule variance is greater than 0, that's a favorable schedule variance. If our schedule performance indicator index is greater than 1, we're ahead of schedule. Where SV equals 0 and SPI equals 1, we're right on schedule. And as we saw here, when the schedule variance is less than 0 and our SPI is less than 1, then we are behind schedule. So a couple of key techniques there. Let's take a look at how we did those. First of all, it's helpful to know that Project Online presents some of these key metrics for us, and we don't actually have to create them. So our actual cost, our planned value, and our earned value information is presented to us in our data stream. Because we want to present that information in a time phased manner here, we've created some measures using DAX. DAX is data analysis expressions. We use a little bit of DAX in our Introduction to Power BI course here at Advisicon, and we get a little bit more involved with it in our intermediate Power BI class. And then we actually have an advanced Power BI class that focuses entirely on DAX modeling. And this type of use of it is exactly the type of thing that we're going after in our advanced DAX course. We've created a measure. A measure in Power BI is something that impacts multiple tables of data, so maybe the projects and the tasks, or multiple, maybe even all lines of data that are in that table. Whereas a column is the other thing we have the opportunity to create, and a column is just adding an additional data point to a particular item. So if I'm looking at the projects table, each line in that table represents a different project. Adding a column to that adds some additional information about each project on each line, whereas a measure would look across all of the projects and determine things like total cost across all projects, or average cost, or cost variance, or so on and so forth. So we've created a measure here about our actual cost, and this is a fairly straightforward mean measure in Power BI for the technique of cumulative value. And so we're creating a cumulative value of the sum of actual cost from a table called the assignment time phased data set. Each line in this table represents an assignment of a resource to a task on a day. So if I've got 5 resources on a particular task for one day, I'll have 5 lines in this table. If I have those 5 resources on a task for 200 days, I'll have 1,000 lines in the table. And this formula is aggregating that information up across that duration. And that is how we create this earned value chart that is aggregating the information about our project. When we looked at this heading on this project, we see that our project status date here is September 1st of 2019. And so we're just a little bit after this particular point where my tooltip pops up and says 18th of August. And that's why our actual cost line is flat, is because we don't have additional information. So it's projecting that in the absence of additional information, that actual cost line is going to stay static. We know that won't happen, but this project is only updated through September of 2019, or into September of 2019. So we created a number of different measures in here that relate to our earned value concepts. And we then present those on our dashboard or our report. You'll see that these KPIs of our earned value metrics are presented in the form of line charts. We don't have to present a KPI in terms of a gauge chart or a speedometer type chart in order for it to be valid. Because we have this very familiar, very commonly used analytic tool of earned value in the project management space, it's customary to present this information in a line chart. Let's go look at some of the other ways that we can present KPIs. So we're taking our same cost variance percent and variance goal information here and presenting it in a gauge chart. And so we see our goal represented by 0%. So we want our variance to be 0. And we see that the value being experienced by the data that is being fed into it is a 70% percentage variance of cost for the project life to date. We notice that this project we're looking at isn't very far along, so this may not be a very large variance in terms of dollar value, but it certainly is large in terms of percentage. Our schedule variance percent and variance goal. Similarly, we have a 0 goal, but our schedule variance has a negative 41%. CPI and the performance index both have got goals of 1. CPI and SPI have goals of 1. So this is a case where we're demonstrating that this gauge visual is not a very effective presentation for these types of metrics, because we've got the same type of a goal here as we do here, but it appears to be very different. We have the same type of a goal here as we do here. Again, very different. And so we would want something that is more of a consistent presentation. And so we go back to that line chart we had on the previous page. This is a visualization that is specifically touted as being used for KPIs. And one of the techniques that you can use in Power BI is that you can get visuals that have been custom designed for particular uses from the Microsoft App Store. But this one really doesn't serve us very well to present CPI. It shows a value, but it doesn't show a goal. So we need to think about our technique. We want to make sure that our visuals are appropriate to the information being conveyed, not merely to the thought that we're conveying some KPIs. That's a key thrust of our Introduction to Power BI course here at Advisicon, is that we're focusing on project and portfolio management. And so we're selecting visuals not merely for the technique being followed, but for the domain expertise that we have in project and portfolio management, so that we're conveying to a project or portfolio manager the appropriate understanding that they should have of the results of the operation. When we look at this information in our web browser, we see the same information in a very convenient manner. So we see the same information here as we saw in Power BI Desktop. The technique here is that an analyst will prepare the reports and the data queries in Power BI Desktop and then publish them up to the Power BI workspace. The workspace is used then to create an app which an individual user can subscribe to, and then they can get to these reports at will and see the latest and greatest information. So they can navigate, here's my project status report. There is that particular project. We can select a different project and the information changes accordingly. You can see we don't have baseline set for that particular one. And so we have easy access to the information. So the summary is we really need to understand the importance of goals and KPIs and that they are related. A KPI requires a goal because it's reporting performance in relation to that goal. And so in the absence of a goal, it's not a KPI, it's just a metric. We want to focus on the performance indicators that are key to the business processes being evaluated, and to the user's ability to apply the information in those performance indicators to fact-based decision-making about their role and responsibility. And then we may need to simplify. We want simple definitions so that people are easily able to interpret the information, and we may find it necessary to provide definitions in the form of our reports and dashboards so that our users have the constant reference as to how to easily interpret that information. We could certainly go farther, and we could change the values that we're displaying here so that they are saying, if it's negative, they're saying it's a $1,352 unfavorable schedule variance, and spell that out. It just depends on how we want to use our real estate and how it's most easily interpreted by our stakeholders. Check me out on Twitter, send me a note in LinkedIn, or just reach out via email anytime with questions. We at Advisicon want to make sure that you found this webinar valuable. I'm Ken Lowen, and I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.